"We don't need old men like you dragging us down," she said, flipping her hair as if dismissing me was a formality. "My name is Arthur Sterling. I'm 59 years old and had been the operations director at Thorne Innovations in Ethelberg, Ohio, for the past 18 years. Not the kind of man who made speeches or demanded attention in meetings, just the steady hand that kept the gears turning at a company that manufactured robust industrial equipment for half the factories in the Midwest. I just smiled sarcastically, nodded once, and walked out of Serafina's office. No arguments, no threats, no drama. Just cleared out my desk methodically while the younger staff averted their eyes. Some of them had been hired as teenagers, now men and women with families, and I'd trained every single one. But nobody said a word as I packed up almost 2 decades of my life into a cardboard box. I caught a glimpse of Leo Chen, a talented CNC programmer I'd mentored, his eyes dropping quickly, a flicker of discomfort on his face. Elias Thorne had built the company with his own hands 43 years ago. Started with a single lathe in his garage, built it into a $30 million business through pure grit and an unshakable reputation for reliable machinery. He'd hand-picked me to run operations when his health started failing. "You're the only one I trust not to cut corners, Arthur," he'd said. He'd even helped me secure the loan for my first home when I was struggling after a layoff, showing me how to navigate the paperwork and vouched for me with the bank. That quiet support meant more than any raise. Now his daughter, Serafina, 28 years old with a fresh business degree and 2 years living it up on the Viridian Coast, Florida, had decided the company needed modernization and fresh perspectives. Code for getting rid of anyone who remembered how things were done before spreadsheets replaced common sense. She'd once scoffed about the smell of grease and grit being outdated, dismissing our hands-on expertise. As I walked to my truck carrying that pathetic box of personal items, I felt a strange calm. Because what Serafina didn't know, what she hadn't even bothered to check, was that my employment contract had a very specific clause, one that Elias himself had insisted on years ago to keep me from being poached by competitors. He'd lost a key foreman once, a brilliant man, because another firm offered him better security. "Your mind is worth more than any machine, Arthur," he'd told me then. "I won't let another company poach that." The clause stipulated a severance penalty equal to 2 full years' salary if I was terminated without cause. I placed the box in the passenger seat and sat there for a minute, hands resting on the steering wheel. Through the windshield, I could see the production floor. Equipment I'd maintained myself, systems I'd implemented, people I'd hired, all about to learn what happens when institutional knowledge walks out the door. I didn't slam the door, didn't screech out of the parking lot. I just turned the key, put the truck in drive, and headed home to call Victor Caldwell, a lawyer friend who'd been waiting for an excuse to take on a corporate case this straightforward. I'd never been the flashy type. Married 29 years to my wife Linda before cancer took her 4 years ago. Raised 2 kids who were both doing well. Son in Boulder, Colorado, with an engineering firm. Daughter teaching 3rd grade in Akron, Ohio. My life had been built around consistency and reliability, the same approach I'd brought to Thorne Innovations. Elias Thorne had been more than just a boss. In many ways, he was the father figure I never really had. My own dad having disappeared when I was 11, leaving my mother to raise 3 boys on a secretary's salary. Elias had taken a chance on me back when I was 41, coming off a layoff from a dying automotive plant with nothing but hands-on experience and a community college degree in mechanical engineering. "Credentials don't build machines," Elias had said during my interview. "Men with sense and skill do." He'd promoted me to operations director within 2 years. Elias and I weren't the types to go fishing together or hit the bar after work, but there was a respect between us that went beyond the workplace. When Linda got sick, he'd been the one to rearrange my schedule without me even asking, ensuring I could take her to every treatment. Family first, Arthur, always. The first warning sign came about a year ago when Serafina started showing up at meetings fresh out of business school, carrying a leather portfolio and trailing a cloud of expensive perfume, talking about synergy and market disruption. I'd catch Elias wincing sometimes at her suggestions, proposals that would have gutted our quality control or outsourced components we'd always made in-house. But he never contradicted her publicly. He just quietly fixed things afterwards. "She needs to learn, Arthur," he told me one afternoon, leaning against my office doorframe. "Some lessons can't come from books." The second warning was when Elias announced his retirement 3 months ago. "Heart problems," he said, though I suspected it was more about succumbing to Serafina's pressure. He looked defeated when he handed me the updated organization chart with Serafina's name at the top. "I made her promise to keep the core team intact," he'd said, not quite meeting my eyes. "The experience you all bring is what makes this place work." I just nodded, but something in my gut tightened. The way Elias wouldn't look directly at me, like he knew what was coming but couldn't bring himself to say it. The morning after my termination, I was sitting at my kitchen table reviewing my employment contract with Victor when my phone rang. Elias's name lit up the screen. I almost didn't answer it. Almost. But 18 years of respect doesn't vanish overnight. "Arthur?" His voice sounded strained. "What the hell happened yesterday?" "Ask your daughter," I said, keeping my tone neutral, not angry, just stating facts. "I did. She said you were..." He paused, searching for words. "Resistant to the new direction. Said you were undermining her authority with the floor team." I said nothing, just let the silence stretch between us. Elias knew me better than that. Knew I'd never undermined anyone. "You're going to file, aren't you?" he finally asked. "Already have," I replied. "Victor Caldwell is handling it." Elias exhaled heavily. I told her to look at the contracts. Told her before I stepped down that there were protections in place. Another pause. "She said she cleaned house yesterday. You, Marcus Thorne, Lena Petrova, anyone over 50. My jaw tightened. Marcus had been our head of engineering for 12 years. Lena ran the quality control lab like it was her personal kingdom. Both irreplaceable in their own ways. The quiet dread I'd seen on some of the younger faces confirmed it. "Is that the direction you wanted, Elias? Clearing out everyone who built the place with you?" "You know it's not," he said, voice tired. "But I gave her control. It's hers to run now." I heard voices in the background on his end, one of them distinctly Serafina's, sharp and demanding. "I've got to go," Elias said quickly. "She's..." The call ended abruptly. I set the phone down and stared at my contract spread across the table. Section 12, Paragraph 3. In the event of termination without documented cause as defined in Appendix C, employee shall be entitled to severance compensation equal to 24 months of current salary. Victor had highlighted it in yellow. "It's airtight," he told me earlier. "They'll either pay or we'll take them to court where we'll win, and they'll pay my fees too." I walked to the window overlooking my backyard. The maple tree Linda and I had planted when we first moved in 26 years ago now towered over the property. We'd nurtured it through 2 lightning strikes and a disease that nearly killed it. Patched it up, supported it, gave it what it needed to thrive. Something shifted inside me. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about value, about recognizing what experience brings to the table, about respecting the foundation others built before you decided to renovate the house. I picked up my phone and called Marcus, then Lena. By noon, I'd spoken with every veteran employee Serafina had fired. Some were shell-shocked, others furious, all of them worried about their futures. Take a breath, I told each of them. Check your contracts. Call Victor. Then I made one more call to Clive Ainsworth, owner of Ainsworth Solutions across town, a man who'd been trying to hire me away from Thorn Innovations for years. Still interested in that conversation? I asked him. 3 days after being fired, I sat across from Serafina and Thorn Innovations' corporate attorney in a downtown office. Victor Caldwell beside me, his weathered briefcase open, my contract prominently displayed. "This is ridiculous," Serafina said, not even looking at the document. "We're implementing a new direction, that's cause enough." Victor, 67, with the patient demeanor of a man who'd seen every corporate trick, simply pointed to the highlighted clause. Termination without cause, as defined in Appendix C, requires severance equal to 24 months' salary, approximately $320,000 in Mr. Sterling's case. The corporate lawyer, a young guy named Justin who looked fresh out of law school, scanned the contract with growing discomfort. "Miss Thorne, the definition of cause here is quite specific. Performance issues, ethical violations, criminal acts." "He was resistant to change," Serafina interrupted, crossing her arms. "That's insubordination." "Where's the documentation?" Victor asked. "Written warnings? Performance improvement plans? Because Appendix C requires a documented pattern, not a single instance." Justin flipped through a thin folder in front of him, finding nothing. Serafina's face tightened. "Fine. So we pay him a few months' severance and move on." 24 months, Victor corrected, "as stipulated." "That's ridiculous," she snapped. "We'll offer 6 months. Take it or leave it." I stayed silent, watching her. In that moment, she reminded me of her father, the same stubborn set to her jaw. But Elias's stubbornness had always been in service of building something. Hers seemed aimed at tearing down. Victor closed his briefcase. "Then we'll proceed with legal action. Discovery should be interesting, especially regarding the simultaneous termination of multiple employees over 50. Justin's eyes widened slightly. He leaned toward Serafina and whispered something urgent. She brushed him off. "Before you make threats," Serafina said to me, ignoring Victor completely, "you should know we're prepared to fight this. You'll be tied up in court for years." I finally spoke. "I've got time. And we'll make it known throughout the industry that you're difficult," she added. "Good luck finding another position at your age." That's when her father appeared in the doorway. I hadn't seen Elias since his retirement party. He looked thinner, paler, but his eyes were sharp as ever. "Serafina," he said quietly. "A word." "We're in the middle of something, Dad. Now." Not a request. They stepped outside. Through the glass wall of the conference room, I could see them arguing. Serafina seemed to be bringing up her mother's side of the family, perhaps threatening to pull their financial backing. Elias gestured emphatically, his posture rigid, reminding her that Thorn Innovations was built on hard work and reputation, not just inherited wealth. Serafina's posture grew more defensive, her face contorted in anger. When they returned, Serafina wouldn't look at me. "Justin," Elias said, "prepare the severance agreement as written in the contract." "Dad," Serafina started. "Not now." Elias turned to me. "I apologize, Arthur. This isn't how I wanted things to end." I nodded once. Nothing more needed to be said between us. As Victor and I stood to leave, Serafina stepped in front of me. "This isn't over. I'll be reviewing all vendor relationships. Any company that hires you can forget about doing business with Thorn." Elias paled at her words but said nothing. I just nodded again, thinking about my conversation with Clive Ainsworth the day before, about the partnership offer he'd made, about the niche market Thorn had been ignoring for years that Ainsworth Solutions was poised to enter. "You're right about one thing," I told her. "It isn't over." The severance payment hit my account a week later. $320,000 minus taxes. More money than I'd ever seen at once. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt hollow. Money wasn't the point. Neither was revenge, really. It was about something deeper. That same afternoon, I met Marcus Thorne, our former head of engineering, at a diner halfway between our homes. The place was nearly empty at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, just a couple of truckers at the counter and us in a back booth. "Victor got me a year's severance," he said, stirring his coffee without drinking it. "Not as good as your deal, but better than nothing." "They want you to sign an NDA?" Marcus nodded. "Can't talk about proprietary processes or business practices for 5 years. He gave a bitter laugh. 40 years in engineering and suddenly I can't talk about my own work. "You signing it?" "Don't see much choice. Got a granddaughter starting college next year." I pushed a business card across the table. "Clive Ainsworth, Ainsworth Solutions." "He's looking for a consultant," I said. "Someone who understands precision hydraulics. No NDA required." Marcus stared at the card. "Thorne would sue me if I took this." "Not if you're just advising on general industry standards. Nothing proprietary about that." He pocketed the card slowly. "What's going on, Arthur?" "This isn't like you stirring the pot." I hadn't told anyone about my arrangement with Clive yet, but Marcus deserved to know. We'd worked side by side for over a decade. "I'm partnering with Ainsworth," I said quietly. "Clive is bringing me in to head up a new division. Specialized hydraulic components. The small batch, high-margin stuff Serafina thinks is a waste of time." Marcus's eyebrows shot up. "The custom work. Elias always said that was Thorne's future. And Serafina's killing it to focus on mass production, thinks she can compete with overseas manufacturers on price." "She can't," Marcus said flatly. "Not with our labor costs." "I know. So does Elias." Marcus leaned forward. "Is that why you're telling me this? You think Elias is involved somehow?" I shook my head. "No, but I had lunch with Lena yesterday. She said Serafina's been liquidating equipment, the specialized machinery Elias bought last year for the custom work. She's already sold half of it." He and I had also heard whispers through our old networks, early signs of trouble, small custom orders being missed, slight dips in quality scores. "That's over $2 million in equipment," Marcus said, eyes wide. "At auction prices, probably got 30 cents on the dollar." Marcus sat back, understanding dawning. "She's stripping the company, converting assets to cash." I nodded. "And guess who's been buying property in Viridian Coast?" "Jesus." Marcus ran a hand over his face. "Does Elias know?" "I don't think so. He built that company for legacy, not liquidation." We sat in silence for a moment, both processing what this meant, not just for us, but for the 100+ employees still at Thorne, for Elias's life's work. "What are you going to do?" Marcus finally asked. "Build something better," I said simply. "Something that respects both the past and the future." "With Clive Ainsworth?" Marcus sounded skeptical. "Clive is just an investor. He's 2 years from retirement himself. Wants to back people who know what they're doing, then step aside." "And let me guess," I said, "you need an engineer who understands hydraulics?" I smiled for the first time in weeks. "The position's yours if you want it, once your NDA is limited to actually proprietary information, not general knowledge." Marcus studied me. "This isn't just business for you, is it?" "It's personal." "It's about value," I said, "about building something that lasts. That's all I've ever wanted to do." 2 months after my firing, I sat in Clive Ainsworth's office reviewing architectural plans for the new facility. The converted warehouse on the east side of Ethelberg would house Apex Dynamics, our new venture specializing in custom hydraulic components. The name had been Marcus's idea. "Build from the corners up," he'd said. "That's how you make something that lasts." The air already hummed with the promise of new machinery, carrying a faint, clean scent of fresh oil and metal. New safety posters emphasizing collaboration and respect dotted the walls. Clive, a barrel-chested man with a full white beard and perpetually rolled-up sleeves, spread the supplier contracts across his desk. "Machine shops confirmed," he said. "They can deliver the first 5 units by next month, and the CNC programmer starts Monday." Clive gave me a knowing look. "Former Thorn employee. Said you recommended us." I nodded. Leo Chen had been at Thorn for 6 years, brilliant with computer modeling, criminally underpaid. Serafina had cut his department's budget by 30% while doubling her own salary. He'd quit 2 weeks ago. "How many does that make now?" Clive asked. 7, I replied, "all top performers." Clive whistled low. "Thorn's losing talent fast." "People follow good leadership," I said. "Serafina's not providing it." My phone buzzed. A text from Lena, still working in Thorn's lab but feeding me information. With her retirement 3 years away, she couldn't afford to leave, but she could certainly keep her eyes open. The message contained a photo of an internal memo. Production delays, quality control issues, 3 major clients threatening to pull contracts over missed deadlines. I showed it to Clive, who adjusted his reading glasses to see better. "Just as we predicted," he said. "The brain drain's affecting output already." I pocketed my phone, feeling no satisfaction in the news. Thorn employed families I'd known for years, people with mortgages, kids in college, parents in nursing homes. Their suffering wasn't my goal. "We should reach out to Frontier Systems, Inc., I said, referring to one of Thorn's biggest clients. "Let them know we'll be operational in 60 days. Clive nodded, making a note. "Already scheduled a meeting for next week. Their purchasing manager's eager to talk." I stood and walked to the window overlooking the warehouse floor below. Workers were installing the first pieces of equipment, the bones of something new, something built on respect for experience and innovation alike. My phone rang. Elias Thorn's name on the screen. "I should take this," I told Clive, who nodded and stepped out, closing the door behind him. "Elias," I answered. "Arthur?" His voice sounded tired, defeated. "We need to talk." "I'm listening." A heavy sigh. "I know what you're doing. The new company, the Thorn employees you're hiring away." I said nothing. It wasn't illegal, wasn't even unethical, just business. "I'm not calling to ask you to stop," Elias continued. "I'm calling to ask for your help." That caught me off guard. What kind of help? "The kind that might save what's left of my company." He paused. "Serafina's been selling off assets, cutting corners on quality. The board's concerned. So am I." "Why tell me this?" "Because you're the only one who knows every part of the operation. The only one who might see a path forward." Another pause. "And because I should have listened to you months ago when you warned me she wasn't ready." I closed my eyes, thought about all those years working alongside Elias, building something we were both proud of, something that employed hundreds of people who trusted us to make good decisions. "What exactly are you asking, Elias?" "Come to my house tonight, 7. Bring Marcus if he's willing. The board wants to meet to discuss options." "Options?" "Yes," Elias's voice strengthened slightly. "Including a change in leadership." I looked down at the warehouse floor again, at our small but growing operation, at the future I'd been building out of the ashes of betrayal. "I'll be there," I said finally, "but I'm not promising anything." "Fair enough," relief evident in his voice. "And Arthur?" "Yes? Thank you for still taking my calls." 6 months after being fired, I stood in the back of Thorn Innovation's main conference room. The quarterly all-hands meeting had just been called to order, with Serafina at the head of the table, flanked by her new executive team. Most under 35, all looking nervous. I wasn't supposed to speak until the end. That had been the agreement with the board. Let Serafina present her quarterly results first. Give her the chance to explain the 37% drop in revenue, the lost contracts, the quality control failures. She was halfway through a presentation blaming market conditions and legacy inefficiencies, using all the buzzwords of disruptive innovation strategy she'd picked up when she noticed me. "What is he doing here?" she demanded, pointing in my direction. Elias, sitting quietly among the board members, nodded to the chairman, who stood. "Serafina," the chairman said, "the board has reached a decision regarding the company's leadership." Her face went white. "You can't be serious." "Arthur," the chairman continued, turning to me, "would you like to explain the new arrangement?" I stepped forward holding a folder, the same one Victor had prepared for my severance 6 months earlier, but with very different contents now. "Thorn Innovations is merging with Apex Dynamics," I said, my voice steady. "The board has approved the acquisition agreement this morning." Serafina laughed sharply. "This is absurd. I'm the majority shareholder." "No," Elias said, standing slowly. "You hold 20%. I maintained 51%, which I've now voted in favor of the merger." I slid the folder across the table to her. "Apex will absorb Thorn's custom hydraulics division. The rest will continue under new leadership." "My leadership," Marcus said, stepping in from the doorway. Serafina flipped through the documents, her hands shaking. This is business," I finished for her. "Nothing personal." A year after the merger, I stood in the expanded production facility that now housed both Apex Dynamics and the newly revitalized Thorn Custom Hydraulics. Workers moved efficiently between stations, the rhythm of machinery creating a symphony of productivity I'd missed during my months away. Elias joined me on the observation platform, leaning heavily on his cane. His health hadn't improved, but his spirit had. Watching the company thrive again had been the best medicine. "Quarterly numbers came in," he said, handing me a report. "Best in 5 years." I nodded, scanning the figures: profit margins up, employee retention stabilized, 3 new patents filed. "Serafina called yesterday," Elias said quietly. "From Viridian Coast." I raised an eyebrow but said nothing. After the merger, she'd taken her settlement and disappeared. No goodbyes, no apologies. "She's starting a next-gen corporate restructuring consulting firm," he continued, "asked if I'd invest." "Will you?" Elias shook his head. "Told her to come back to Ethelberg first, learn the business from the ground up, the way I did. The way you did." He smiled sadly. And she hung up. But she called back this morning, asked if the offer still stood. Below us, I watched Leo training 2 new programmers on our latest system. Lena, in her lab coat, inspecting components with her characteristic precision. Marcus at a workstation, sketching a design modification by hand before transferring it to computer. Experience and innovation working side by side, not in conflict. Not one replacing the other, but building something stronger together. "You know," Elias said, "when I wrote that severance clause in your contract, I never imagined how it would turn out." I smiled. Neither did I. We stood in comfortable silence, watching the company we'd both helped build continue to grow. Some lessons are expensive, but the ones that stick, the ones that change how we see the world, those are always worth the price.